Hello, I'm Declan Carey, and this is the Redaction Politics Podcast. Today, I'm joined by our contributing editor, James Moules, our reporter and head of news, Matt Trinder, and our reporters, Mason Quah and Richard Hansen. Welcome to the show, everyone.
Hi.
Hello.
Hello.
Today, we're going to talk about a few different topics. And first of all, apologies for not going live. Something came up on our end, but don't worry, you've got our US election special to still look forward to. More about that later on. First of all, for today's show, how are we doing, guys? What have we been reading in the news recently? Anything that's stood out to you?
Well, we've got a footballer in the UK who's a better leader of the opposition than the supposed leader of the opposition. So that's a start.
Yeah, indeed. So I assume you're referring to Mr. Marcus Rashford.
I am indeed, yes.
Striker. He's done quite well, hasn't he? What do we make of Rashford's campaign then? This is for free school meals for children, which, of course, the government did vote down only a few days ago.
I think it's important to start off remembering that he was yellow carded this evening in United's 0-0 draw with Chelsea. So I think it's important to talk about his professional standing before we talk about his place in politics.
Let's learn some perspective here, guys.
Yes.
It's heartbreaking that this had to happen in the first place.
Yeah.
To lend some perspective for our international viewers, the UK government has been providing free school meals to underprivileged kids. There was a controversy around that earlier in the year when the lockdown came into effect, that it wouldn't have gone on during the school holidays, but eventually the government caved after a campaign from Marcus Rashford, who is a 22-year-old football player from Manchester, led a very high-profile campaign to extend these free school meals through the school holidays. Eventually the government caved. This has come up again now that we're approaching the winter season, and the government, in spite of an amendment from the Labour Party in the Commons, voted down extending the free school meals. What is there to make of this?
I mean, I'll play devil's advocate in a minute, but it does surprise me how electorally unintelligent it is, given that, the Conservatives took swathes of working class northern seats in 2019. They've managed to annoy quite a large percentage of them, particularly regarding this, given that, places like Manchester, Liverpool are in tier 3 of COVID restrictions at the moment. So arguably they're the ones that are going to be most affected by this sort of thing. But then I suppose, from the Conservative Party perspective, obviously it's cruel and immoral. But are we to expect anything less of them? I mean, I guess they've been quite socialist in their policies recently, with obviously the furlough payments and the self-employment scheme and things. But I wonder if they're just kind of reverting to type here, and they just had a slightly different hat on, and they've just removed it.
Yeah, I saw a Tory minister on the BBC this week. I can't remember who it was, forgive me, but he said that there had always been child poverty under Labour and Tory government, so it was nothing new. That was the best he could say. Yeah, okay, are you going to do anything about it? Obviously not.
I mean, I can't see the argument why the government wouldn't want to do that. I can't think of a politician who would think this is not a good thing to do. I don't know, has anyone seen an argument for it?
I mean, you'll be amazed how many people buy the idea that, it's the parents' responsibility to feed their children. The government spent too much already. They can only afford to spend so much. In the sort of circles we're flying in, that may seem obvious that we should be extending that to that. You'll be amazed how many people actually buy what I just said, though.
The only small amount of I'm trying to perhaps try and see the other side of the coin here. I've talked about this in a few podcast episodes. Until the end of this week, I've actually spent the last 7 months working in a supermarket as a sort of COVID relief effort, partly, so I've seen these sort of these meal vouchers being spent through the summer and through the the various half terms. And not to generalize, but it's certainly not an insignificant amount of parents who perhaps spend that money on things that they maybe shouldn't. I'm certainly not saying that it's anywhere near the majority, and I'm certainly not saying that but I certainly have, sold, bottles of vodka and packets of John Player's Red using these school meal vouchers. So, be that as it may, maybe that's one of the reasons why they're deciding not to continue on with it.
Yeah, I mean, there are quite a lot of kids who have free school meals. I had a look at the stats before. This is from Local Government Inform, their website. They estimate in England it's about 15.9% of kids in secondary schools have free school meals. Rashford's also tweeted that since launching his first campaign earlier in the year, more children have signed up for free school meals. So that's a great thing, raising awareness of that. What was really interesting for me, and I want to pick your brains on this, is the way Greater Manchester stood as a region against a decision which many saw as coming directly from London, being told what to do and how to do that. Can we see more? Do you think we're going to see more of this now that Andy Burnham's taken that lead?
It's advanced the independence cause for the north of England by years.
Yeah, well, this is surely this is the job of a combined authority. That's what they're for, right? To fight for the interests of their region. I mean, it's a strange kind of setup in the UK. We don't have a federal system in England. We don't have local councils that are meant to be strong enough to challenge central government in this way. But if these areas perceive the government's handling of COVID to be this chaotic, then I think they will start to feel that they should and perhaps they must stand up to the government, because things are getting desperate. These are very unusual times, and over the winter, their constituents, their voters, are going to suffer. But it's not in the repertoire of this government, Johnson and Cummings in particular, to give way to this kind of pressure. I think the free school meals, for example, they voted against it because it was a Labour initiative.
I think it's also important to remember that the Johnson and Cummings government came from Vote Leave, and during that campaign, and obviously moving forward and into 2019 and into the present day, they've had vast swathes of the working class northern seats. They've taken those sort of voters for granted. Those voters have been largely pro-Leave and have been agreeing and wanting Brexit to be gotten done. Whereas now they seem to have got finally to an issue that really does, where those northern voters come down on the other side of. So it almost leaves the government in sort of uncharted territory, and they're not really sure how to respond.
Yeah, it's not a constitutional crisis anymore. This is actually affecting people's real day-to-day lives. So the stakes are being raised, and I think we're going to see more of these political confrontations for sure.
Of course, one of the issues with it was that allegedly Andy Burnham was offered a higher amount, up to £60 million at one point, then was later offered £22 million, I believe it was, after negotiations. So it does beg the question, was Andy Burnham right to do that and then receive a lower amount, or should he just have sort of played ball, so to speak?
Well, it's since been announced that Manchester will receive £65 million on top of that £22 million that was sort of, said you can take this now because you've played hardball. I mean, he's obviously costed these figures. He's worked out how much that the region needs in order to survive under these tier 3 restrictions. And, he's obviously got the best interests of his constituents at heart. So, good on him, I think. And I think it's going to inspire more sort of regional leaders to do the same if they need to go into tier 3. Time will tell. But I think it's going to be a bit of a call to arms nationally.
I think if we do sort of look at the longer time frame, I'm going to be optimistic and say that I want the message of what is being done here to sort of resonate forward for a long time. In the same way that the Irish remember what was done to them during the famines, in the same way that people of Bengal remember what happened to them during world wars. I think that this is something on, obviously not the same scale, but it's definitely significant, and it's definitely something that I think should be taught for generations onwards.
It remains,
as people like to quote, the North remembers.
Indeed. It remains to be seen, though, because conversely, Mason, you've got news now, just in general, is not designed to be remembered. We talk in news cycles. We don't talk about how electorates have long memories. Well, I absolutely hope that these people do remember when it comes to the next general election and getting rid of this awful excuse for a government. I mean,
electorally speaking, the most seats in Greater Manchester and in Merseyside were already Labour.
Yes, but if you look at the seats in Lancashire, who are also in Tier 3, many of those seats, flipped from red to blue in 2019. Seats like Burnley, seats like Bury North.
Yeah, but they're not seats that Andy Byrne was representing.
Manchester, which are blue, who, in my opinion, have absolutely no right to be.
But it does, I think I see what you're saying, Richard, that it does feel like not just an attack on Manchester, but on the north. Because although James is right that Andy Byrne doesn't represent seats like Burnley, it does feel like a lot of people in that area come from similar demographics. And I don't know, I think the symbolic issue of it is a lot larger. It almost kind of reminds me of what the Lib Dems when they raised tuition fees. Perhaps it could be one of those moments that people do remember and actually plays out at elections.
Indeed. Time will tell, but yeah, I hope so.
Yeah, I think, there are definitely examples of these things sort of reverberating for a long time, like there are still entire cities boycotting the Sun newspaper after Hillsborough. It is possible with a strong enough social campaign to rally a community for decades over a single political issue.
Indeed, and I wonder also whether there'll be a role to play for particular newspapers. So obviously, Mason, you bring up how people in Liverpool don't buy the Sun, and the Sun is not stocked in Liverpool really at all. But maybe there will be a particular newspaper of one stripe that won't let this issue go, and it'll mean that it'll gain traction.
Well, we saw the Mirror recently. One of their recent headlines, their recent front pages was to print the names of all of the Conservative MPs who had voted in favour of not extending the free school meals to children. But you're quite right. I mean, in the case of the Sun, for our international viewers who aren't aware, the Sun is I think it's still the best-selling newspaper in the UK. Anyone correct me on that? Yeah.
I think
it's
so.
Very right-wing tabloid, very popular newspaper, sort of. And it was boycotted largely by the city of Liverpool after something called the Hillsborough disaster. There's an entire episode on this podcast to be had there. But to lend some perspective, there was a massive human crush at a football game, and this newspaper largely blamed it on the Liverpool fans who were at that football game, and it's never been forgotten in the city of Liverpool.
And it's important to remember that those fans have been subsequently exonerated.
Exactly.
As well.
Yeah.
Coming to that front page that we saw, where the name of MPs who voted against that were printed on that. Did we check our local MPs and how they voted? I know mine is a Liberal Democrat, Sarah Olney, and she was paired. She wrote on Twitter, so she couldn't participate. She was away on business. Do we know how our MPs voted for that?
I have a Tory local MP, and he was not one of the 5.
My local MP is the head of the 1922 committee, Sir Graham Brady.
Oh yeah.
It's been interesting to see. I mean, he did vote with the government in this case, but it's been interesting to see his position on the move into Tier 3 for Greater Manchester. He's been criticising the government, which is interesting to see, especially considering his position as the head of the 1922 committee, which is a committee of backbench MPs who can theoretically trigger a leadership contest within the Conservative Party.
Yeah, there's a clear warning there that if this carries on over the winter, then we're going to get serious. So Johnson has to be careful there.
I completely agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I do wonder how that will play out, because if they start to struggle in the new year, people could start to point fingers, and you know where that usually leads. Yeah. So very interesting time ahead.
If I remember correctly, last winter we had some hospitals with 95% bed occupancy, and that was not during a global pandemic.
Yes, so. It's interesting though. Again, maybe I'm playing the devil's advocate for this entire episode, but if you look at this, if you look at the Southern Hemisphere, of course it would be me to bring that up. The Southern Hemisphere didn't really have a flu season this year, largely because social distancing measures were in place. It were mask wearing, all of the things that we talk about and have become our day-to-day lives. So sort of seasonal flu didn't spike in the same way that it normally does. People staying inside more, people socializing less. So I wonder if that's going to happen in the Northern Hemisphere this season.
And of course, it raises the question, obviously, in the broader scheme of things, like if we took these measures, we were all taking these measures in society in the first place, would seasonal flu be such a thing?
Indeed.
Yeah. So. But all it will take, if there is a bad normal flu season, then I just don't see how UK hospitals could cope with that. There'd have to be some kind of massive emergency release of funding, many more Nightingale hospitals. I just don't see how. So if there's something else this winter, if it's a particularly bad winter, last winter we had lots of flooding in February that was forgotten about by March because of coronavirus. If something else happens, then it could be awful.
It could get a lot worse before it gets better.
Yeah.
It's going to be a long winter, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, indeed it is. I mean, on the topic of COVID, we now have the tiered system, obviously, which we're all living in. Obviously, Matt, you're in Spain, so that won't apply. But it has been quite confusing to me to figure out actually which tier I'm in and what that allows us to do. How have you found that experience? Because even looking online, it's not really there, I found.
No, and speaking as somebody who is currently in a tier 3 location, I'm in Greater Manchester right now. It's interesting. There doesn't seem to be a great deal of difference on the ground. Like I bring back my sort of supermarket analogy. I get all sorts of people from all different walks of life coming in, and there's a still large proportion of people who are not masked. People not really changing the way that they live. Obviously some are, but there doesn't seem to be this sense of like, oh, we're in tier 3 now, so things have to drastically change. And I think that's partially due to the confusion around the rules.
Yeah, I think in Spain it's different. People seem to be aware here that this is a serious thing. I wasn't here for the most severe lockdown, but apparently the army were checking people's receipts when they left the supermarket to check they were only doing essential shopping. Now, even in the strictest lockdown in the UK, I didn't see people wearing masks. Obviously, people were trying to stay at home. I didn't see friends for months, but when I was out, I didn't get the feeling that things were that different in a way. It was strange, but here everyone wears a mask everywhere they go. Things are different at the moment because there's no national state of emergency, so each region is following different rules. So that's a bit confusing, but the government are meeting tomorrow to perhaps declare a new national state of emergency. So yeah, I think from here in Spain, the messaging has been a bit clearer.
Same in Italy. I was there just on a holiday before the air bridge was removed. I was in Sicily at the end of September. And similarly, very simple rules. Wear a mask, no exceptions. Keep a metre apart from each other. I mean, I know cases do seem to be rising there now, but it was very rare that I saw anybody unmasked. Remember, I went into a gelato shop just with my son, very accidentally forgot to put my mask on, and immediately at the door, no mask, and you wouldn't get that in the UK.
No.
In London, it's been quite interesting because there's my local pub, which I frequent often, and when you go in there, they're very strict on it, and I quite like that because you feel a sense of security there. You walk in and they ask you to clean your hands, they ask you to check in, they ask you to wear your mask until you sit down, and then take it off once we bring your food or your drinks. And actually, I quite like it. But I do know other pubs, and I've been invited out with friends who have gone along. Obviously, we're in the tier 2 now, so you're not supposed to mix with other households. But I have by friends to go and do that and politely declined. But a lot of people say that, well, you just go in and you just say you live together, and there's 4 of you or 5 of you, and you just say we live in one house and it's fine. And I do feel for those businesses because they need that income. They need people to go there and buy things. It's people's livelihoods there. But also, I think there's so much confusion and there's so much sort of flaunting of the rules that I don't see how it's going to get any better. Have you noticed similar things going on?
It's confusion, but I think it's also people not thinking that they're going to get caught. I mean, I'm not I don't want to speak for everyone, but I know of several people who have returned from abroad, from places where they do need to quarantine for 14 days, have done so, but have not been contacted at all to make sure that they're staying home. So I think there is an element of A, confusion, and B, well, the government aren't going to know, so what they don't know maybe won't hurt them.
Yeah. And as has been shown a few times, even when the government does know, the government doesn't care unless a big deal is made out of it, even then.
Or they stand to lose a lot of money. There's different motivations at play, I think.
Yeah, I think from my point of view as well, I mean, neoliberalism has a lot to do with it because Spain hasn't been gripped by it like the UK has. I mean, there's no state in the UK to deal with this kind of problem. Who is going to check up on you if you're not quarantining?
No.
That's the thing. There's no one to do that kind of thing anymore, and perhaps that sense of social responsibility as well has been eroded. So I'm not too surprised, really.
And like even the mildest methods, just to show that there was an awareness, would be better than nothing. I imagine that would probably see a massive decrease in people flouting the rules if we just sent, text reminders to people in quarantine. Something as simple as that doesn't actually carry any enforcement power, would have the social impact of reminding people of these rules and making it seem as if they are going to be enforced.
I do think, though, there's something to be said for the fact that the current government were elected by and large because they were going to, quote, get Brexit done. And they were the people who said that loudest and most often. And now we have a situation where which requires true leadership, and these people are truly being found wanting. So I think there really is something to be said for, well, Mason, people aren't getting text messages to remind them because nobody knows how to do that. Nobody knows what's instituted.
I think we are being led by skilled veterans with no leadership ability.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you raise an important point. The most recent general election in this country we had was not a general election. It was a Brexit election. Exactly. It was a one-issue election.
Yes, it was just making sure that you were happy with what decision you made in 2016. And we said, well, yes, we were. And now, COVID wasn't a thing in December. So unfortunately, who knows where we're going to be in 4.5 years' time.
And Johnson is obsessed with popularity, so that's why we're seeing this confused response. He doesn't want to say, stay at home, wear a mask, because he knows people don't want to. So he says, oh, you should, but, it's an Englishman's right to go to the pub, so I don't want to tell you not to, but stay at home, but don't stay at home. It's just absurd.
But it's interesting as well, I think, conversely, you look at some other leaders around the world, Jacinda Ardern, for example, in New Zealand. If you look at the way that obviously New Zealand has different factors at play, especially given its size and population. But, this was a leader who was very firm. You must do these sorts of things. You must isolate. You must stay home, go hard, go early. It's just had a general election and has won an overall majority, which is incredibly rare in the New Zealand electoral system. So it's in a funny old way. I think Boris, trying to remain popular, has tried to sort of be on both sides of the fence at the same time, and has succeeded at annoying both camps of people.
Yeah, the British are freedom-loving people, I believe was the line, right?
Yes, that's why lockdown
works. Freedom is such a nebulous word.
Yeah.
Get drunk at home. If you can't get drunk at home, you can go to the pub. But if you go to the pub, you must stay 5 feet away from all the other tables. And if you must stay at a table, then you must drink at least 3 beers. It makes no sense.
210-ish countries in the world, and I think 195 of them have freedom. So let's not talk about Britain and freedom being a kind of a unique aspect.
In bold and italics, the Great British freedom, isn't it? That's what makes it different.
Indeed. Well, there are 7.3 million people at the moment. That's around 13% of England are in tier 3, so a lot of people are in that situation. Let's see how that plays out. And of course, just on the other side of the Atlantic, there we become closer and closer to one of the biggest events this year, arguably. I suppose after COVID now, we're not very far off. Biden still has a lead. How do we see that playing out in the next couple of weeks?
Well,
here.
No, I think, okay, so firstly, I think we need to talk about the debate and how, in my opinion anyway, feel free to disagree with me, I don't think it's going to change anything as far as the needle is concerned. I think Trump needed to have a kind of a real game changer moment. He didn't have it. I mean, I don't think Biden was impressive at all, but I don't think Biden really needed to be. I think two things to consider. I think people on the left are freaking out that we're seeing similarities to 2016 with national polling and leads in particular swing states. I think we take that with a large grain of salt, given that polling methodology has been updated in the last 4 years, and also the huge swathes of people who have already voted. But I think it's still Biden's to lose. And the next 2 weeks or week and a half will be very interesting. But I think if I was a betting man, and I am, I'd be putting my money on the former vice president.
Are you going to have a bet on it, Richard?
Well, I've already got a beer riding on Georgia with James. I think Trump's going to take Georgia, but I may do. We'll wait and see.
I'll just say this. This time in 2016, I had a beer with a friend on Trump winning the election. I said Trump was going to win. He said Clinton was going to win. And I said at roughly this point in 2016, I said, looks like I'm owing you a pint on November the 8th, doesn't it? And no, it turned out the other way around. So who knows?
Who knows? I mean, if you do look at the betting odds, though, it is interesting because so you've got a number of polling some methodology. You've got 538s. I'm not going to use the phrase nowcast because that's what they used 4 years ago. But who's going to win the election is giving Trump about a 13% chance of victory, which is about 1 in 8. But if you look at the betting markets, they're giving Trump about a 1 in 3 chance of winning. They're giving Joe Biden about a 65% chance. It's interesting that there's a quite a wide margin between where the money's going and where the science and the data is going.
Yeah, and the polls in many swing states are very close. I just checked the latest, and Trump is leading in Ohio and Texas, but Arizona, Florida, Georgia, Iowa, North Carolina, it's under 2%, the difference. So that's in a margin of error, surely.
Trend in elections, though, that polls close as the election day draws nearer.
Mm-hmm. It was interesting. I read something that Nate Silver of 538.com, somewhat of a data guru, said today, talking about a 1 in 8 chance. So, so basically, 3 things need to happen, quite fundamentally, for Trump to have even a 50-50 shot at the presidency. So, firstly, the polls need to tighten the same amount that they did in the final 2 weeks of the 2016 campaign with the James Comey letter of 24th of October 2016. So firstly, that needs to happen. Then there needs to be a similar polling error, of which there was about 3% in 2016. And only then Trump has a 50-50 chance, not will win, of winning.
I should point out that we are recording on the 24th of October. So James Comey, if you're listening.
Yeah, happy 4th anniversary of changing Hillary Clinton's life. But that does go to show that some fairly significant things need to happen, and especially in an environment where the polls haven't moved significantly at all since we knew who the 2 nominees were. So, like I said, it's definitely Biden's to lose, but every Democrat is going to be nervous for the next 10 or so days.
Look, at the point I've made in podcasts like this before, I mean, several 10,000 votes in the Rust Belt swung it towards Donald Trump against Hillary Clinton in 2016. Biden only needs to win back, about 70 or 80,000 votes in 3 states, in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, to win.
Yes.
That's it. Yes. And the chance he may win even more than that in other states such as Arizona.
Yes, but you've also got to remember that I don't think Trump is going to just go quietly. I think if Biden wins by similar margins that Trump did in 2016, if he turns over those 70,000 votes in those 3 states and no more, then you can bet your absolute bottom dollar that Donald Trump is going to be challenging those results in court and challenging all of those mail-in ballots and all of those early voting ballots. But yeah, you're right, James. Biden has opened up leads in other areas, in Arizona, in North Carolina. arguably in Georgia, as much as I don't want to admit it, and in Texas. So yeah, you're right. Even if he doesn't win in some of those Rust Belt states, he could get his numbers up in other areas.
To sort of pull things back to the debate a bit, Trump did sort of make his attempt at getting that same kill shot that he had on Hillary, bringing up the Hunter Biden scandal with laptop, and it flopped. He tried to bring it up every time, but it got shut down almost immediately with what I think was a very spicy quote from Biden. This isn't about my family or your family, it's about their families. And that's the rhetoric that I think is going to swing like all 5 of those remaining people who haven't yet made up their mind.
That's the bottom line. The pandemic has been the bottom line for Trump. His absolute mismanagement of COVID-19 has neutralized anything he can bring up against Biden.
Absolutely. And this Hunter Biden thing, bringing it up now, I mean, it's important to remember that the Hillary Clinton email scandal was going on for months and months and months, and it was really it had really ionized in people's minds. Whereas now, 2, 3, 4 weeks out, when a percentage of the electorate has already voted. Yeah, I agree with you, Mason. I don't think that's going to have a huge amount of cut through at all.
I think one thing from the debate, though, could damage Biden, which is this oil issue, because he talked in the debate about a transition from oil. And now he's backtracking a bit and saying, oh, no, I just meant ending subsidies on oil. And Trump is really going after him on this, saying that you're going to cost people jobs in Texas and the Rust Belt and that kind of thing. So I think the perception that Obama and Biden didn't look after those voters before 2016 is partly what cost the Democrats the election. So if Trump can hammer that home, that they're going to leave you behind again, they don't care about you like I do, then that could help to tighten the polls in some of these swing states over the next week or so.
The bottom line
I do think, though, that Biden could...
Sorry, yeah, I think that was just a single line point. Trump now has a record to defend.
Yeah.
That end.
I do think, though, that with the right line of rhetoric, Biden could spin it around quite easily. Every dollar that goes away from oil is a dollar that's going into ethanol. And there are a lot of corn farmers who would be very happy to hear that in swing states.
Mm-hmm. Matt, I agree with you, but I think you're giving a little bit too much credit to Trump, who I don't know has ever spent 11 days talking about the same thing in his whole life.
Obama's birth certificate.
Sure. But by and large, Trump is terrible at staying on message. If for some reason he's able to do that, if he's able to tamper down his inflammatory tweets to Hillary Clinton and to AOC and anybody else who perhaps offends him somehow, and maybe focuses on that one issue, you're right, it might tighten the polls. I think, James, you're also right. That Trump has a record now, so Biden can point to certain things and say, look what you've done. Do you really want 4 more years of this?
I think that I don't know if I fully agree with that. I think Trump would do better if he narrowed his attacks on Biden specifically, because I don't think he's actually winning any voters when he's still talking about Hillary and Obama and pretending that he's running against Bernie Sanders.
I said this in several quarters before the pandemic hit. I said, if the 2020 election is about Trump loses. If the 2020 election is about whoever his opponent is, at that stage we didn't know it was going to be Joe Biden, Trump wins. You're right, Mason. It's definitely Trump's probably last shot. It's the only play he's got left in his book, is to make it as much about Biden and potentially his failings.
I mean, I'd add another dimension to that point about whether it's Trump or Biden, who is about. It's about how it's about them as well.
Yes, and the issues surrounding them.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's an easy way if that were a Democrat candidate, it could have been spun to a positive for them, or in the case, as we've seen now, with Trump, spun to his negative, given that he's so much managed to mishandle the COVID-19 pandemic.
Yes, and
that's when you coffin, dare I hammer that final nail in? I am calling it. Yes, Trump is probably going to lose, but
I'm not willing to hang my hat on that quite yet, but
it is always
respect.
possible to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory.
This is true.
The Democratic Party are very good at doing that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we saw Barack Obama, didn't we? Former President Barack Obama get involved recently as well. He gave a speech, didn't he? Promoting Joe Biden, talking about the election. What do we make of former presidents getting involved?
Well, it's two things. Well, one, it's very interesting to see him getting involved so late. But also I think they've probably kept him at a little bit of distance because of this whole Rust Belt issue. There are a number of voters who voted for Obama in 2008 and 2012 and felt betrayed. Because the industries had gone and there hadn't been enough emphasis on retraining these people and making sure that they were still in good paying jobs, that they went to Trump because Trump said, well, I'll just bring coal back and I'll, bring, climate change back. So I think I'm not sure how much cut through Obama's going to have with these people, in the Rust Belt. But I think he is going to be good at engaging some younger voters. But then those people are voting for Biden anyway. So I'm not sure how much effect he's going to have, really.
Yeah, it's interesting to think why now, because maybe it is reflecting that slight Democrat nervousness that things seem to be going the same way as they did in 2016. But then who knows? I was reading before we met this evening that they're expecting youth turnout to be 63%. It was 46% last time round. So if Obama can get a few more youth votes out, then it might make a difference. But I'm not sure how much people really pay attention to the interventions of former presidents. I'm not sure how much impact it actually has.
It's clearly the Democratic strategy to have Obama as the closer. But yes, I wonder if that's been planned for quite some time, not taking into account the current climate that we're in and the issues that Biden might have to respond to.
Yeah.
Do we expect that complacency might come into it with Joe Biden having a lead? Do we think some voters might think, well, it's all done?
Actually, actively trying to say that, hasn't he? He's been saying, "Ignore the polls. We've got work to do." I've seen him tweet that several times.
Yeah, a couple of things with that. One is, exactly what you just said, James. The other thing is that so many people have already voted. There are no takebacks. You've already voted. That's signed and sealed, that one. So I would say not. But then again, I might be wrong. Like I said, I'm cautiously optimistic that Biden's going to win, but I'm not there yet completely. I'm not calling it yet.
I give Biden 70% is my take. That's my
I would do the same. Yeah, he's certainly got a better chance than Trump does, but it's not over.
Yeah, a friend of mine recently voted from Spain, actually. She sent her postal vote off, and it's taken quite a while to get there. And she told me she's quite concerned that actually it's not even going to count in the end. That must be a big worry. I've voted before by a postal vote, the Brexit vote in the UK. I did that. So yeah, I think a lot of Americans have done that this time around, especially with COVID. People are locked to where they are, and yeah, I don't know. That's going to be an issue. Is that going to affect the election?
I did. To be honest, that's a genuine question to any of our American viewers. I don't know how the cultures there works. I voted by post in this country, in the UK, for ages. That's just how I've done it for ages. I've never turned up at a polling station for years.
Well, there has been the deliberate attempt over this election cycle to both deconstruct the infrastructure required for postal voting and to delegitimize it as a concept. That's something that Trump's been working very hard on.
Yes, he appointed the new head of the U.S. Postal Service is a very much a Trump loyalist. So it's important to think about what he might be doing behind the scenes. But also, James, I think postal voting has been a thing in the U.S. But obviously, because of the pandemic, we're talking 50, 60, 70% of the votes in certain counties and certain states will come from before Election Day. So just simply the logistics and the infrastructure that's required to process this number of ballots is pretty vast.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and if Trump is trying to delegitimize it, it hasn't worked because record numbers of people are voting early. So I think that's going to be to his detriment, largely speaking, but we'll see.
I think also just I think we need to perhaps talk about maybe some of the markers are going to be on election night itself to look for as to which way that the night is going.
Yeah.
I think if we see things like North Carolina being called early for Joe Biden, I think it might be quite a short night, as it were. But similarly, I think if we see those, because I think it's important to know that Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, and to its lesser extent Ohio, will not be called on election night. We know that already, just by the fact that there are laws in some of these states that state that the postal votes can't begin to be counted until after election day.
Yeah.
So no matter what data we see on the night, the networks aren't going to call it. So we're going to have to look at some other sort of focal points as to see where this is going. I think Arizona is another one. I think if Biden manages to take Arizona, then it could be good for him, and obviously Florida. But equally, I think if those states are either not called very quickly, or looking like Trump's doing well, then I think he might do. He's got a good shot for re-election.
Barring major upsets, without those states you just mentioned, is there any chance we could be seeing 270 on election night?
Yes, in the event of a Biden landslide. If you take the three Rust Belt states out of the equation entirely, but you say Biden wins Florida, Biden wins Georgia, North Carolina, Arizona, Texas, then sure, you can 300 plus on election night. But I don't think it's going to go that way, personally.
No, I agree. I agree he's not going to get Texas.
But there could be a scenario where the networks are in a position to call it, but without data from Pennsylvania and without data from Wisconsin and from Michigan and from Ohio, that's a huge chunk of really important electoral votes, which could go one way or the other. So we could be in for an election week. That's a long podcast, guys.
We'll be live streaming all week, won't we?
I'm having yes. My wife's having a baby later that week, so maybe I have to bow out at some point. But yeah, indeed.
I thought we'd all book the week off. Well, this is of course our live stream, which we should now plug. So come and join us. That's Tuesday, November 3rd. That's going to be around 10 o'clock GMT. We're going to be giving you all the updates, keeping you up to date with what's going on, giving you some analysis. We'll have a special guest coming from Safe Passage UK to tell us a little bit about our fundraising initiative and where that money's going to go. Do donate to that if you can. We'd really appreciate it. And it's also James's birthday as well, right? The following day, I believe.
Sorry, Declan, for our international viewers, what is GMT?
Greenwich Mean Time. It's UK Standard Time.
UK time.
Yeah. So definitely check that out. One issue which I thought might be quite interesting to look at and talk about is, let's say Biden does win. One thing that Biden really spoke about clearly in the debate and has spoken about is Trump's COVID policy. A lot of people have died. Biden's been heavily critical of Trump of that. Should Biden win, he immediately goes into a position where he's president of a country which is in the middle of a massive crisis, arguably bigger than they've had for such a long time. Death rates, it seems, continue to increase. We're going to a long winter. That's going to put a lot of pressure on Joe Biden. Do we see him handling that pressure well?
Well, if you look at historical precedents, I would say no. Only if you look at recent Democratic presidents who have won, you look at Obama in 2008, his popularity levels fell relatively quickly when he took office, and the same thing happened to Bill Clinton when he won in 1992. That being said, there's nowhere near the same levels of enthusiasm for Joe Biden just as a candidate as there were for Clinton and for Obama. So, a lot of people are voting for Biden largely because he's not Trump. He's got a lot of support from moderate Republicans. So maybe that will work to his advantage. But I do agree with you, Declan. As soon as, noon on the 20th of January, it becomes his problem. And he could lose popularity very, very quickly if he has to make some tough decisions that a lot of Americans aren't going to perhaps, I'm not going to say agree with, but are going to find difficult to live with for a while.
I think the other point we need to consider is that the Trump administration is going to make the transition of leadership as difficult as possible. And I think that is going to provide an added strain to Joe Biden's ability to sort of handle the pandemic. it's very challenging to know how that's going to turn out.
I've said this on previous podcast episodes. I think if Trump loses significantly, he'll resign on election night. But genuinely, I think Mike Pence will have to lead the transition. I don't disagree with you though. I think they're going to make it as difficult as possible, and they'll be as obstructive as they can. So it may take Biden a little bit of time to find his feet. Only once he becomes constitutionally empowered can he start, moving the levers of government.
Clinton famously removed all the W's from the keyboards in the White House, didn't he, before George W. Bush took over? So imagine what Trump will do before Biden moves in. Who knows? But yeah, I can't see Trump being this magnanimous, 10-week transition president where he has a meeting with Biden in the Oval Office and they smile and shake. I just cannot see it happening. So yeah, I could see him going straight away. It's not in. Donald Trump has not changed as a human being since he was in the first grade, and I genuinely, and I don't think it's not in him to be a loser in his own mind. I mean, of course, he is a winner. And if he is handed the ultimate loss, he will resign and he will spend the 10 weeks tweeting about how he was screwed over for one reason or another, and it was rigged. And
he was treated, how it was so unfair, and
it also any resignation means that it gives Pence the opportunity to pardon Trump before Biden takes office.
Of course, yeah.
Oh.
I do think that it's a very interesting sort of dissonance that doesn't get sort of attacked enough, which is that Trump is constantly posturing as the straw man, but almost everything he says is excusing a failure of his. Most of the debate was him trying to sort of deflect from failures. I'm not mishandling the pandemic. That was China. I'm not the one with a bad race record. Biden brought in the crime bill. He said he was the best president on race since Abraham Lincoln.
And then didn't understand the joke that Biden made by calling him Abraham Lincoln. It was one of the few times I laughed in the debate when he didn't get Biden's middle school level joke. But anyway,
I think that really does just show how petulant he is. That this is meant to be the debate where they don't cut over each other, and he instantly takes the bait.
Yeah, he's the king of whataboutism. Somebody throws an accusation his way, he just says, "Yeah, but what about Hunter Biden?
Hey,
what about
I'll have
Hillary?"
you know that whataboutism was invented in a Soviet government lab.
Yeah,
it's a secret leftist technique.
Well, don't tell Trump, otherwise he'll stop using it.
Yeah.
There'll be another email somewhere. We've spoken about what Trump might do and what Biden might do. What might Trump's supporters do? Are they going to accept this if he went on to lose?
There's going to be violence. Trump's been appealing directly to the QAnon fan base for a while now.
Yes, but also I think Biden has been doing his absolute best to remind people that he is going to be president for everyone. He says, "I'm running as a proud Democrat, but I will be the president of the United States." And I think it falls to Biden actually to try to unite the country as best he can. If Biden wins significantly on election night, or immediately thereafter, then I think you will see him really doing his absolute best to give America a great big hug, and to try and bring as many people back into the fold as possible. And I think there is some possibility for that. I think if with Trump out of the way, Trump is the most divisive figure in world politics for quite some time, for certainly the last since 1945, in my opinion. So without him there with a microphone as big as he has, maybe Biden will be able to bring people back. But maybe I'm too much of an optimist.
The concern is if
I'm not a Democrat, I'm not a Republican, I'm a president. But all Americans seems a really sort of vapid platitude that I'm not sure how far that'll go beyond the election.
Yeah, I don't think it's the moderate Republicans that would be swayed by that kind of rhetoric who are going to be, turning out after election night and trying to contest the results. It's going to be the radicals of Trump's fan base who aren't going to tolerate either result because, A win is cause for immediate celebration that will probably result in some level of violence, and a loss is a conspiracy that will immediately result in some sort of violence.
Yeah.
What kind of violence do you expect, Mason?
Well, I mean, it hurts me to predict this. I'm expecting at least one mass shooter.
Yeah. I mean, if you look at the scenario that they had in DC when I forget the reason why there were protests in the first place. Was it because of Black Lives Matter, and George Floyd, or was it before that? It was when Trump came through and had the church Bible. Was that because of George Floyd? I think it was.
I think so. Yeah.
So I think it'll be on that kind of level of violence. I think at least which is really scary.
I think the two levels of violence that we can probably predict relatively easily are: one, some form of mass shooting; two, somebody driving a car into a crowd of protesters. That's we've seen both of these happen repeatedly over the past year. If they're going to happen at any point, it's going to happen on election night or the day or the morning after.
Yeah, and imagine if Biden calls for restrictions to deal with coronavirus, because Trump has constantly downplayed the issue. So if Biden decides to take that step, then
another way of anti-mask protests.
Yeah, we've already seen guys turning up at town halls in places, with machine guns and intimidating legislators. So it could get nasty.
It's one of the reasons I hope there is a definitive result. I think if Trump wins, I mean, that's a whole other argument. We don't need a whole other podcast series about that. But if Trump wins, I hope he wins decisively. Similarly, I hope if Biden wins, then he wins decisively, because at least then there's a line in the sand, and we can point to that this wasn't a close run thing.
I think if the outcome goes too far from what the polls have said, and we have to remember that there are definitely segments of Trump's fan base that are using their own polls that aren't representative. If the results are outside of their predictions, they are going to call conspiracy. They're going to call fake news.
Yes.
And I think too decisive a Biden victory is going to sort of play into that narrative.
However, if you look at the one pollster that Trump retweets the most, that's Rasmussen Reports. He's the one that been consistently given him roughly even approval ratings throughout most of his presidency. Even if you only take Rasmussen polls, Biden still wins the Electoral College. So there's going to have to be quite a significant error. But yes, Mason, I know I saw several polls. I use this term incredibly loosely. Who won the debate? Trump 96%, Biden 4%. 29,000 votes on Twitter that could become 28,000 of them could be Russian bots for all we know. But Trump retweets these things, and his followers will lap it up.
There are definitely true believers in the campaign that I think are sleepwalking into what is going to be a massive defeat.
Well, fingers crossed. And if you look at 2019, I think I've said this recently, if you look at the 2019 general election in this country, we were all looking at the polls in the lead up to the election, and we were saying, well, we're only one polling error away from a hung parliament. So it's not entirely impossible that, a similar thing will happen. Election night rolled around, 10 o'clock, Conservatives, 360 something seats, right? And that was basically what the polls told us was going to happen. So I'm hopeful that a similar thing is going to happen in 2020. The polls are telling us that is Joe Biden's election to lose. He's on track for around 350 electoral votes. And I'm hoping that that's going to remain the case.
Mm-hmm.
Indeed. I think one of us on the live stream event night should be the Twitter correspondent and just follow Trump's tweets and Biden's tweets that night.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Okay.
Yeah. Absolutely. That'll be one facet to look at. I think another facet will be to look at how different networks deal with it. If obviously Fox News is going to be far more pro-Trump than somebody like CNN or ABC or CBS, NBC, how they are portraying it and whether they're willing to make certain calls that other networks won't. Obviously, certain networks, you don't want to get it wrong. You don't want to do a 2000 and call Florida for Al Gore and then call Florida for no one and then for Bush. But equally, there's enough partisanship out there that maybe some people will be tempted to do the wrong thing.
I think, there will be a good time to be had in just watching, I guess, the breakdown of cognitive dissonance on some of the conservative networks overnight. The level of coping, and then finally the acceptance. I think that's the dream, right?
That's the dream. But and it's interesting. We don't really have too many historical precedents or relevant precedents anyway to draw upon. The rise of the populist right around the world. They haven't been in power anywhere and then suffered a big defeat, not on a big scale. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see how that all plays out, Mason.
Yeah, there will be global repercussions to this, just for what it means to far-right nationalists as a global movement.
Yeah, and we've seen the results in New Zealand, Bolivia this week as well. If Trump loses, there could be, there's a head of steam building, but obviously it's a long way to go.
The Republican Party as well are going to have to take a long, hard look at themselves and figure out what they stand for, because for the last 4.5, 5 years, they've staked everything on Donald Trump. So if he becomes the first president since George H.W. Bush to not be reelected, they're going to have to look somewhere else for a bit of ideological guidance, perhaps.
Well, it took a while to come around to Trump in the first place. It was a massive Never Trump movement, even up to the Republican convention in 2016.
Yes, but now you see the party in lockstep. But then again, some down ballot Republicans have started to distance themselves a little bit from Trump, and also even you've had people come out in this country. I think Sajid Javid tweeted or put an article out saying how he thinks Biden would be good for the UK, which is interesting given that the special relationship might be on the line. So there's a little bit of posturing going on. People thinking that maybe this isn't going to be Trump's to win.
Mm-hmm.
I'm quite excited in general for an election night. I feel like it's been a while since I've stayed up and watched an election all night, so I'm rather excited to watch it coming in. I don't know how you guys feel.
I was up covering, as a local news reporter, covering the 2019 election in this country, mate. Don't hold your breath for how great it is.
It depends which way the results go. I mean, I covered the New Zealand election for Redaction, which is only 3 or 4 hours long from go to woe, but it's much nicer coming out on the right side of it.
Yeah, this is true.
Well, I'll have
I was up all day for like 24 hours straight though with the UK election last year because, like I say, I was covering it as a local news reporter. I was properly running on fumes for the time the results actually called. And even after the exit poll, I still had to be up for the actual count and oh god.
Yeah, it was difficult.
Journalism, guys, don't go into journalism.
At least that's something that the US does that the UK doesn't. I mean, I know we've got time zones to deal with, so obviously things don't start until relatively almost midnight here. But at least they're willing to make calls on things. Networks make calls, as opposed to in the UK when we wait for every single vote to get, the returning officer. I mean, there's something quite romantic about that, Lord Buckethead standing next to Theresa May. But do we really need to wait for, Maidenhead to be called specifically with the exact vote numbers before David Dimbleby or whoever it was, makes the call for? So yeah, at least the US is willing to almost try and have a result by midnight local time.
Mm-hmm. Just for context, Lord Buckethead, that's the Monster Raven Looney Party, right? Am I right in thinking that?
He was just Lord Buckethead, wasn't he?
I think he was an
independent.
I think he ran for the monster. There was something like one of them ran. There was Count Binface last time as well, and one of them was Monster Raven Looney Party, and one of them was just an independent, and one of them was like the other one, the previous election. And I think Count Binface had the most reasonable Brexit stance of all, to be honest. What he said is we should have a referendum on whether to have a second referendum.
Makes sense.
On Brexit.
I do think there is definitely something to be admired about Lord Buckethead, because he is the only politician that I have ever heard of to be willing to, like in a town hall talk about, I don't actually know if I'm allowed to say the words actually, Like, I mean,
Are we on for the watershed?
I don't know if I have to censor myself on this. The only politician that I have ever seen to talk about wearing pieces of jewelry on places where they are not normally worn, and how this ties into the need for nationalized health service.
And he has to stand, and Theresa May or any other mainstream politician has to stand next to this person and give them a little bit of legitimacy, even for that 5 minutes.
How did he get through security as well? Sure, I mean, you're with the PM, so surely,
I think surely if you're on the ballot, you've got there's special considerations. Who knows?
Yeah. But does he walk in costume, right?
Yeah,
could
surely
be a Spartacus situation, or 20 different people turn up in the Lord Buckethead suit.
Yeah, how we digress. Imagine if Trump had to do that. That would have.
You imagine?
I don't know if he's still. I don't think he's still running. But they had Vermin Supreme, Boothead guy.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
Free unicorns for every voter.
For our viewers or listeners, this tends to be quite a British tradition, doesn't it? At an election, to have someone in a silly costume, basically standing next to the important figures or well-known figures, and as Richard said, add a bit of legitimacy to it. But it's all a bit of good fun, isn't it?
Yeah.
Got to have something.
I mean, it's always a fun time reading their manifestos, because every now and then, like they'll talk about how this policy that they proposed in parody was adopted by another party, and how this lends them legitimacy. Or how by the year 2024, the United Kingdom will be leaving the solar system.
Honestly, to our international viewers, please Google the Monster Raving Loony Party. That's the Monster Raving Loony Party. Please go and Google that and see what British politics is actually like.
I love democracy. It's just great, isn't it?
Okay, that feels like a good point to start wrapping things up. Just before we do we have any final thoughts on the US election? I think.
Shall I just ask? I said 70% Joe Biden percent chance. I'll ask everyone else. What's their odds on that? 70-30 Trump, Biden Trump for me.
Yeah, I'd probably say about 75-25 Biden. Starting to feel a bit more confident about him as we get closer.
I think there's so many ifs. I think if the polls remain the same, I think it's 90-10. But at this point, 10 days out, I'm going with Matt, 75-25.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. My heart is telling me, it's probably going to be 80-20 or 90-10. But at the same time, I recognize the power that political pundits hold in being able to not only project public opinion, but to dictate it, which is why I'm going to say 100% for Biden. In fact, 115%.
Surely then Declan has to say that Trump's a certainty to win, just for a bit of balance.
No, I actually think I'm going to take a slightly more pessimistic view. I think 60-40 to Biden, of course.
I was about to say I'm the one who's giving Trump the best chance, but no, Declan for me.
I think it's going to be a lot closer. I think in previous episodes of this podcast we've spoken about the shy conservatives, and I think it will come through. So 60-40, I think Biden will take it, but it's going to be closer than we expect, is my feeling. All right, then. Well,
my current prediction is that Trump holds Ohio, but Biden takes Georgia, which is possibly a bit off the wall. So we'll have to see, won't we?
I can bring a beer for our live event.
Absolutely.
I'll have something peach flavored.
Okay, well, thank you very much, everyone, for listening. I've been Declan Carey for this episode, and of course, I was joined by James Moules, Richard Hansen, Matt Trinder, and Mason Quah. We had a lot of the redaction team today, which is always great. We had quite a lot of comments on our New Zealand podcast, so that's great. I think keep it up, keep the comments coming. I know Richard was particularly pleased with them all, so put a big smile on his face. And of course, remember to join us for our live event. That's on Tuesday, the 3rd of November. That's approximately 10 p.m. GMT, Greenwich Mean Time. Come and join us. We're going to be talking you through it, and hopefully we'll see whether it'll be a good night, a terrible night, who knows. I think everyone here, we're going to be there, right? Matt, you're joining?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. So
I'll tell you what I will do. I'll be bringing a live quiz along. Everyone will have to bring their pen and paper along. I'll give the results as they come in. general knowledge quiz. Come and join.
Excellent. Sounds
Thank
fun.
you. Okay, so from all of us, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time. Cheers, guys.
Thank you. Bye.
Take care.